Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Friday to each and every one of you. We're going to be reacting to a snippet from this State of the Nation video with Frans Cronje because there's some really interesting bombshells that they deliver in this. Before we get into it, though, I quickly wanted to discuss something about a little more broadly that I think will start to make sense as we go through this video as well. But effectively, what is discussed here, it starts with a discussion of the national dialogue. And Frans Cronje, in this talk, actually explains how they had focus groups a few years ago. And what they found in those focus groups is one of the big problems that ANC voters have with the ANC is show, don't tell. People are sick and tired of the ANC talky, but not doing anything. And Frans Cronje makes the argument here, the national dialogue is perhaps the most asinine and perhaps the worst idea the ANC could ever have come up with. And that is because it's the ultimate display of tell, don't show. Once again, talky, no doey. And the South African public is sick and tired of talky, no doey. And that's ultimately what the ANC decided to put front and center. We're going to get into this conversation, and I'll have a lot more to say about it. But before we do, I want to just highlight one thing. I wasn't a super fan of the GNU. I understood its initial formation, and then shortly after its formation, I started looking at the GNU, and I said, look, what even is the point of this? The ANC is still doing whatever the hell it wants. No one is clearly there to stop them. The only difference now is that every other party is implicated in what the ANC is doing. So I don't know why we're here. I don't know what the point is. Now I'm starting to think that perhaps the GNU was one of the best things that could have happened to South Africa. For right or wrong, doesn't really matter. But there are a large group of people in this country who bought the propaganda from the ANC that should the ANC ever lose power, apartheid will immediately come back. Like, there's just no other way. The second the ANC is out of power, oppression will return. And that may have been a big fear for a lot of people with the GNU, because effectively the ANC does cede a lot of its power with the GNU. The difference has been where other parties have governed now within the GNU. I think ANC voters can look at that and go, wait, but they're making good decisions. They're helping local farmers, even someone that I don't like John Steenhuisen. I have to give it to him. He's consistently out and about with small to medium farmers, helping them out, trying to see what the minister and the agricultural department can do for those farmers, which I think is great, right? Because it shows that you genuinely care. I think one of the biggest winners in this GNU is Pieter Groenewald, or as many in the country has started calling him, Pieter. Because I think Pieter Groenewald has showcased a genuine level of care for people, right? Trying to get prisoners to get work experience, to show something of their time in prison that will allow them to adapt and flourish outside of prison. And voters see that, right? There's so many people on social media now saying, I never expected that I would vote for the Freedom Front, but maybe I will, because they're seeing that this guy isn't there just trying to help white people. He isn't there just trying to help one group of people. He's there just trying to do his job, right? And the job that he was called for. In fact, it's clearly working, because when you look at the EFF, you have someone like Carl Neos now saying this one, hashtag Pieter Groenewald, is simply copying the proposals that we as the EFF MP representatives on the Portfolio Committee for Correctional Services have made about our EFF policy for insourcing. The EFF is desperate to claim what Pieter Groenewald is doing as their own. The difference? The EFF only came up with those proposals a couple of weeks ago, right, where they proposed that everything be insourced. The difference also being that the EFF's proposal to insource isn't about skills development. It isn't about helping those people to eventually become successful outside of government. It's basically to turn those people into permanent slaves of the government, where the government runs all of its own departments and it does not share the wealth with anyone else. there's a big difference there. But the EFF is pointing this out because they know this is working. This is working way too well. They don't need this. And then the second thing that I think is really good about the GNU is that for the first time ever, South Africans who have lost a reason to vote, so unmotivated voters, may actually find return. In the last election, we had just over 50% of the population, voting age population, that actually voted in the election. Why that is significant is when you look at the percentages, the ANC, EFF, and MK received just shy of 65% of the vote. I believe just shy or just over 65% of the vote. But when you actually look and see that only about 50% of voting public voted, you realize the ANC, EFF, and MK got just under a third of the country. They got 32.5% of the vote. Now, you might say, but hold on, Stefan, there's no evidence to suggest that all those other voters would vote for, the DA or the Freedom Front or any of those parties. They may vote EFF, MK, and ANC. To that, I would argue, the ANC over the last 4 or 5 years under Cyril Ramaphosa specifically have become increasingly more populist. They have noticed that they are losing votes to the EFF and thus has moved further to the left, further extreming or moving further and further towards the extreme ends of the left. The EFF is a very populist party. The one thing that populist parties have is voters that are motivated to vote, because that's the whole point of populism. You're appealing to all or as many voters as you can. So this suggests to me that the overwhelming majority of South Africans that aren't voting because, one, they didn't think that the ANC could ever actually lose, which would motivate them now to actually go out and vote, or two, they didn't know who to vote for. They weren't sure who to trust, and perhaps now they have a more clear idea. But okay, let's get into what Frans Cronje had to say, because I do want to share a couple of really good things with you guys here.
The kinds of issues that have caused ANC voters to leave the ANC. So just from a strategic perspective, whether it's good, right, or wrong, and people can disagree with me on the national dialogue, but just this, I'm talking about strategy. Strategically, this is terrifying if you're in the ANC camp.
Yeah, it is.
You are highlighting every week, as prominently as you possibly can, the core things that have caused your support to drop as far as it has.
And this suggests to me that the ANC, the smart people that used to direct the ANC, they're no longer there. And what you have now are the criminals, the people who are just trying to make themselves rich. And so they're making decisions like the national dialogue as a way to make themselves rich. They don't really think about what the actual repercussions are going to be.
As an aside, while I'm on
this
on
is
the
super
roll,
interesting. Listen,
a chap came to see me who'd be well placed to know these things, and said the most extraordinary thing that perhaps I've heard. He said to me that there are people, serious people, around the current kind of command structure of the ANC who seriously hold the view that the voters will soon realize the mistake they've made and what they've done to the ANC and what they've done to the country. And that by just sitting tight, it is a matter of time, and the voters will come back because they'll understand what they have brought about and what they have caused to the ANC. Now,
and this is why the ANC will lose in the next election. You see, because the ANC has become, and France does actually mention this, they have become so detached from reality because their leaders have effectively put themselves so far away from the people. Remember, these people don't live our lives. They live the lives of kings, right? They get millions of rands. They all have businesses upon businesses. They fly first class all around the world. They don't know what the average Joe in public think, nor do they care. To them, it's not important what the average Joe thinks. They're so used to the idea that the ANC will persist and it will just always persist. It's called the winner's fallacy, right? It's literally something that has been observed in psychology, the winner's fallacy. It's when you believe that because you have always won, you'll just always win. And there's no reason to believe that you won't always win. And I believe that's what the ANC is up to. That's why the ANC doesn't seem fazed or worried about anything that's currently happening in the country, because they still firmly hold that if they just allow the GNU to destroy the country, as they've been doing for the last 10, 20 years, people will not blame them for the destruction of the country, but rather the GNU. And then people will vote for the ANC again, realizing once the ANC isn't in power, how bad things can actually get. The problem here, of course, is people have memories. People can go, wait, nothing has changed. And the only constant is that you guys are still in power. So clearly, you must be the problem. But the ANC doesn't have the ability to connect those little dots. And then I just want to show you guys one last bit of good news before we leave.
In Johannesburg, there's now data to show the ANC at 20% of the vote, fighting it out for third place with MK, with the DA at a multiple of that number, but not.
The DA isn't at 50% yet, is what he was going to say. And it's still early days. The DA could get to 50%. The DA, with the help of the Freedom Front and perhaps a couple of other smaller parties, could get to 50%. Let's run the gauntlet here. The ANC lost Mpumalanga. They're most likely going to lose KwaZulu-Natal in the next local elections. If they lose Gauteng, that means that they no longer control Gauteng. They no longer control the Western Cape. They no longer control the Northern Cape. They only control parts of the Eastern Cape. They no longer control KwaZulu. I think I said KwaZulu-Natal. They no longer control Mpumalanga. They have Limpopo and Northwest. Those are the only two parties that they have left. The only two provinces that they have left as the ANC. That is the end of the ANC. Because the looting has then effectively stopped in all of the provinces where looting is actually possible. They might control the Free State, although the Free State is also increasingly starting to turn on the ANC. So maybe they'll hold on to the Free State. I didn't mention the Free State because it's difficult to know what's going to happen there. But maybe they keep the Free State, Northwest, and Limpopo. The problem is none of these three provinces are loot-heavy provinces. They don't have a lot of business, a lot of economic sort of prowess to become looter paradise. And so effectively, that means the ANC will be fighting over scraps. Members of the ANC will be fighting over scraps. The money in the country will now be flowing into the coffers of other political parties running these provinces, no longer into the coffers of the ANC and the ANC cadres meant to enrich themselves. And if the Western Cape is any indication of what happens to the ANC when they finally lose power, what we generally see is them completely unraveling, right? The leadership here in the Western Cape of the ANC has been diminished severely, with a lot of the looters and opportunists leaving the party after they lost because the money had suddenly dried up and there was no point for them to even try anymore. And this is why you see every single year they sort of have this rotating roulette of leaders and leadership changes and trying to get the party to figure out how it needs to do stuff. Because the ANC cannot be a party in opposition. It is a party that's supposed to rule so that it can make money and steal its money and hand out the stolen money to the cadres. Now, there's a conversation that we have to have about what does this look like when you have a criminal government with criminal entities in every element of society suddenly lose power. Will they, and they do sort of discuss this in State of the Nation, although I disagree with some of the stuff that Frans Cronje, because they sort of make the argument, well, because South African society is so robust and we have this massive private sector, we should be able to absorb whatever the ANC throws at us. But I feel like that's assuming that the ANC goes off into that night quietly. I don't think that's what will happen. I think the criminals will either, one, flee the country, they'll take their millions and they'll go live their lives, their days out somewhere in Europe or maybe somewhere in Africa, or probably more likely, the criminals will make this country ungovernable because that's all they can do. They don't want to stop stealing. They don't want to stop the taps. They don't want to close the taps. And so I don't know exactly how we deal with that. Probably going to have some enclave system where some parts of the country are under private control and other parts of the country is just complete anarchy. But, you know, at least for now, some good news. the ANC does appear to be on the way out. Anyways, let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of this development. It's good, I think, on the one side. It's always a fun conversation, so I'd love to read your thoughts. If you like what I do and you think more people should have access to the content that I make, please consider hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and letting me know in the comment section, because engagement truly does help. Then, massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons and the YouTube channel members that allow me to keep doing what I do and give me money so that I can cover the stuff that I care about without necessarily having to care about the YouTube algorithm, what the algorithm wants me to care about. So huge thank you. If you want to support, just hit the link in the description down below or click the join button right below this video. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. A peace.